What's up, everybody? It's Andrea. Today, we finally figure out how to feed through shields. I dig into the historical archives, and we ask the question, how have Keiko and Miles never eaten together before now? Stay tuned.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Shereese, today we're talking Season 4, Episode 12, The Wounded. This episode was written by Stuart and Sarah Carno and directed by Chip Chalmers. When Captain Benjamin Maxwell apparently goes rogue, the Enterprise is ordered to apprehend him before his actions result in another war between the Federation and the Cardassians. Another war? This is the first time we've ever seen the Cardassians. I'm so excited about this one.
Is it?
Yeah, I think we've heard the name Cardassians, but we've never seen any Cardassians up until now, which is crazy because it's past the halfway point of like TNG as a series.
Was it only the Romulans that we've been seeing then?
Mm-hmm.
Was it the Romulans who said we're back, not the Cardassians?
No, that was the Romulans.
Wow, so all those were the Romulans. Okay, so this is the first time we see Cardassians.
Yes, the real bad guys of note who are like a threat have always been the Romulans, and this is the first time we get the Cardassians. And they become like a huge presence in the Star Trek world. But this is our first introduction, which is fucking awesome. It's super cool.
Yes. And I have to say, like, as far as the makeup goes for the Cardassians, besides the main guy whose makeup job I freaking hated. I hated the little weird mustache on his cheeks. I hated all of that.
Oh, the little mustache on the cheeks was so disgusting.
It was like, it was more than disgusting. It was like physically disturbing. But anyways.
Yes, it was. Okay. I'm so glad I'm not the only one who thought that.
I was like,
we can't be the only ones who are disgusted. So I'm going to go ahead and pop a picture of that guy on our Instagram so our listeners can also be disgusted.
Yeah, which is at the TNG Podcast. Yeah, but Cardassians usually don't have that. So I'm thinking they tried it and then they said, maybe not so much for like the rest of ever. But I have to say the Cardassian monster makeup is one of the best makeup jobs as far as baddies go on Trek.
Agree.
It is so detailed. They have this snake-like look, but what I love about this versus the season 1 Party City mask nonsense is that they have fully, and I think Michael Westmore has been the makeup artist of note on the show since like probably season 2 or something. I have to go back and look at this because you can see the quality of his work versus whatever was going on in season 1.
Yeah.
And this is so beautiful. Like this is like this iconic look of taking a snake and making it look human-like. So he does not look like a snake. He doesn't just have a big snake head on top of his head.
Yes, but it's not Antikins and Sele. This is like properly done.
It's properly done. There's ridges on the side that are kind of like make the neck wider, like a snake's neck is wider. There's ridges on the top. I mean, it's just such a cool monster look.
Yeah.
So thanks, Cardassians. I did not understand, but now that you say that, I'm like, oh, that's why they had that like weird helmet thing, visor thing on their heads at first.
Yeah.
I was like, what? But then they quickly took it off and I was like, oh, okay. That was just like some part of their like decorative costume that again, we don't, as far as I'm
really glad we don't see that anymore. I'm really glad when I first saw that, I was like, oh, what the hell?
It takes away from the cool like facial ridges too.
It does. It ends up looking ridiculous. I remember 20 years ago or more, Oakley, famous sunglasses company, made these sunglasses because they were trying to be all cutting edge and shit. They made these sunglasses that don't wrap around the front of your head. They're kind of like a headband, but you put them on like front to back, not like ear to ear, like a regular headband. So it was like these circular glasses. And then they both like each lens had like a plastic strap that went around to the back of your head over the top of your head. And I was like, who the F is going to wear that? And then I saw one person wearing it and I was like, yep, it looks as dumb as I thought. Like it was terrible. Yeah. And then I never saw it again. Cause this is what happens sometimes when people start trying to get like too artsy and creative with shit and you end up with Oakley sunglasses that go over the top of your skull. Like it's just like, no. And you're right. It totally takes away.
It was a little overstyled. It was like one step too far. But then they took it off like a little bit later in the episode and you're like, oh, okay. Like not a problem.
And we never saw it again. And also their uniforms rock. They're so cool. They've got that like almost like, remember in Captain's Holiday, those aliens from the future, how they had that like holographic-y fabric. They brought that back for the Cardassians. And then they have kind of these like armor plates that upon closer inspection look like foam, but like, oh my God, they look so freaking cool. I love the entire look of the Cardassians. You're right. It's snake-like, it's nature derivative, but it's not, a teddy bear helmet or something weird where you're like, what? It's awesome.
Yeah,
all right,
it
what
was
are your
beautiful,
initial thoughts on
although
this episode,
quite
Shereese?
uncomfortable, I have to say. I was like, man, while these outfits are great, like give me the Klingons outfits any day. Like this just feels oof. Their walking is tough, but that's the point. They're supposed to look stiff.
Yes.
Anyways,
Totally.
okay, my initial thoughts. I had zero recollection of this episode when it started.
Oh my God, same.
Spoiler alert on my final thoughts. I had zero recollection of this episode when I finished. I was like, where has this been? Since when has this episode existed? Like there was some of the other episodes, it was like, oh, I vaguely remember a little bit of, but nothing at all. I actually thought it was a different episode. I thought it was the episode with Ensign Ro, but she doesn't come onto the show for another season or two. So I was like, what's going on right now? Yeah. So this was like a total bonus episode. What about you?
It absolutely the same. This felt very much like going back to our childhood again. Do you remember when like Disney would be like, for a limited time only, we've taken this movie out of the Disney vault for sale or whatever. Mm-hmm. This is what this felt like, where it's like, oh, TNG had this in the vault and took it out. I don't remember when I looked at it. I had looked at like the episodes that we need to watch, and I was like, oh, Devil's Due is next week. Oh my God, I love that one. I was like, The Wounded. What the hell is that? Like no recollection at all. Although I gotta say, this episode really did hit me in a lot of feels for a lot of different reasons, but I'll get to that when we get to like final thoughts. So let's open this up. The captain's log opens up the episode and tells us that it's been just over a year since a peace treaty ended the war between the Federation and Cardassia. And I went, who are the Cardassians? And you guys were at war over a year ago?
Right? At the same time you were at war with the Borg? Nobody mentioned that.
Yeah. Also, like Tasha Yar didn't talk about the Cardassians or anything, like nothing. But all right. So they're waiting.
But I'm okay with that because you mentioned, remember when I asked about the neutral zone back in season 1? And I was like, but I thought the neutral zone was, I don't know, somewhere else. And you were like, well, there's lots and lots of neutral zones. It's just like borders between land, between space, I guess. And you were like, yeah, there's a neutral zone between like this people and that people. So I guess it stands to reason that there could be like a war between multiple different peoples in space. Going on simultaneously that we don't know all the conflict happening in the galaxy.
When we hear the neutral zone, especially for TNG, we're like Romulans. But yeah, now it's like neutral zone between the Cardassians, neutral zone between like the Federation and Romulans and the Federation and Cardassians. Like there's a lot. So yeah, that was really interesting. And they're like, ooh, we're at this like neutral zone, waiting at the border of Cardassian space for this like envoy to meet them. And this is our first time we ever see this new alien race, which is super cool. Now Picard does sort of wax poetic about the last time he was in this sector where he was like running for his life after an unfortunate run-in with the Cardassians. He's like, I was sent as an envoy to something. And
it was to garner peace talks.
Yes.
That's what it was. So he came in with his shields down because he wanted to go first and say, I want to have peace. And he said that was a big mistake because they opened fire immediately. and my little stargazer was getting beat the heck up. So I ran out of there as fast as I could because Troy was like, you were running, you run. He was like, oh yeah, I was running as fast as I could out of that neutral zone. So it's great to be back.
You're like, goodwill gesture, white flag, and then somebody shoots the like flag out of your hand, and you're like, oh God,
and you're like, God, see you later. we're not ready for this talk. Apparently, bye guys.
Now, Worf does not trust them, but Counselor Troy is like, look, the Cardassians are our allies now, and the Federation has to trust him. And I'm on Team Worf with this, where he's like, trust is earned, it's not given away. And I was like, yep. Word. And I think that this episode, I'm actually really, really glad, even though I couldn't remember it at all to start, really glad I watched it because it's so allegorical towards veterans of different wars and battles, and then having to like switch your viewpoint on like a group of people that you have been trained to like mistrust and hate and kill and take hostages and all this. And suddenly it's like the rules are different. And how does one adapt to that? And I think the answer is with great difficulty. And it's, I love that this is very much like a human condition type of episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's like, oh, I'm not trusting you at all. Nope.
Yep. And it's Worf. So he doesn't trust anybody. And I feel like that's what makes him a really good chief of security.
Yes.
He's always on his guard. He's always looking at people sideways. He's always waiting for something to go down. And that's what makes him good at his job because something could go down at any minute. And Picard is always like, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's all be friends. And that's nice. And that's why Picard's the diplomat and Worf is not. but sometimes you just need a phaser. Like you just need a phaser. Like I feel like Worf would have never been in a scenario where they would have shot him and found him unaware, because he wouldn't be lowering his shields.
Not even a little bit. And you know what? I gotta say, a lot of different people in this episode are really coming to terms with the fact that these enemies are now our allies, and we are supposed to trust them, and we're supposed to give them access and whatnot. And Picard seems to be fairly immune to that, which it seems very Roddenberry-esque, where Picard is just sort of the model for what a good captain would be. And we kind of see that develop as this episode goes on. Now, we do have a throwback to Data's Day from last week, where we see Miles and Keiko are kind of settling into their married life, and she's made him this breakfast of kelp buds, plankton loaf, and sea berries, and he's just not super impressed.
Yeah, he's not excited about it. There's like no meat and potatoes.
There is no meat and potatoes, and yeah, this is one where like we actually see a lot of like Irish strokes, you know, in this episode, but
which was my complaint in Data's Day. I was like, I wish we could see a little bit more of his culture.
Yeah,
and we got that like times a million in this episode in the form of food, which makes a whole lot of sense. Like it didn't need to be decorations at the wedding. I just wanted something. But when it comes to food, which I hadn't even thought about, that's one of the most powerful ways to display your culture to other people.
See, I'm a foodie. I've been cooking since I was, you know, an infant. Practically.
Right. Before you could walk. Sure.
Before I could walk, I was like sauteing stuff, but not really, but kind of. So I always think that sharing one's culture through food is like one of the most powerful expressions of your culture. And that's how you share your love. And I love that he was like, where's the muffins or oatmeal or corned beef and eggs? And she's like, for breakfast? And I love this scene because even in the homogenized 24th century, like future world, cultures still hold on to their characteristics. Yeah. And I love that. And I also noticed that behind Chief O'Brien is a bonsai tree. And I was like, oh, I love like that everybody just doesn't become like one homogenized culture. It really is like, yes, you're Cardassians and yes, we're humans, but look at how different we are, even like within our one species. I thought it was really wonderful.
Yeah. And I thought so too. Like I thought it was, well, that's not true. I think so now that you're saying it. What I thought, according to my notes, was how is it they've never eaten each other's cooking before?
Yep.
That's what I thought.
I agree.
I was like, how is that even possible? Like you guys have never eaten intimately before? You've only ever eaten at 10 Forward or something?
Probably. Yeah.
But even if you did, but even if you did eat at 10 Forward, why would you never order meals that are like comfort food for you and your culture? So I still had a bunch of big question marks of like, I get that you're newlyweds, but you're just barely right now breaking out food for each other, not just Keiko, but also Miles, right? He's like, I'm going to cook you my type of food. And she's like, okay. You know, and I'm like, you guys didn't know? Because it sounded to me like Keiko's like a vegan and O'Brien is very much not. He's definitely a carnivore. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be for the two of them, I don't think it really matters. But when they have a kid, it's going to be like, what do we feed the kid? Do we feed her kelp or do we feed her steak?
Yes.
Like, how is that going to work? So anyways, I thought it's very interesting. This whole episode is kind of a slice of life about O'Brien, and I'm okay with that. Like, I like it too. Yeah, I like when we get to see some other people, not just Picard and Troy over and over and over. Like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, no, we are getting a more like complete picture of like some of the key players on the ship, and I love that. Now, as they're talking, the ship starts taking hits, and O'Brien's like, danger, and he has to take off. And it turns out this Cardassian ship arrives and starts firing at the Enterprise, who's very, very easily able to be like, pew, pew, and then get it to stand down. Like they fired like lasers 4 times, and like the Cardassians are like, okay,
yep,
sorry, hailing frequencies open, right? And Picard is like, hey, we were scheduled to meet you here. Why are you firing on my ship? Which is, you know, a very fair question. And the Cardassian captain says, well, this is what happens when we're at war. And Picard's like, we haven't been at war for a while. Like we have this treaty. And I think it's great that the Cardassian now says, well, if we're not at war, then explain to me why one of your own Federation ships destroyed an unarmed science station without provocation. Like this is yeah, it is bum, bum, bum. It really, really is.
Yeah, I like that too, because I was so confused. Like I was just as confused as Picard was. I was like, what is going on? And then as he describes what's going on, because then I thought, well, why didn't he just say, I had so many big questions. I was like, wait, if they're back at war, shouldn't they have gotten like an email or something?
Or letting them know, communicate at
letting
least.
Them know, hey, Picard, by the way, the entire Federation's back at war. So just so you know, or something like that. So I thought that war had sparked again, and somehow the Enterprise, the flagship, was not aware. But as Captain Gal Masset, explains what's going on. I'm like, oh, there's some Federation ship that's apparently gone rogue. And so that is an act of war. And so now they're just mobilizing their forces to any Federation ship that comes in their space. They just need to blow it up before it starts destroying them. And that's going to spark off a whole new war. And I was like, oof, so glad Picard is there and not me. Because this is a time when we do need to talk first and shoot second. So
yes, this is absolutely that kind of time, especially when peace seems to be so tenuous between the Federation and the Cardassians, where it's like one false step can really lead to some really bad miscommunications that lead to people dying. Now, Admiral Aiden, Picard is like, maybe let me check my inbox because I may need some info here. So Admiral Aiden,
give me 1 hour before we go to full war. Just 1 hour, one Earth hour. You know how I feel about time and space. I'm like,
whenever the Ferengi are like, I give you one of your hours. I'm like, okay, at least I know it's one of my hours and not a like Ferengi hour. That's like 4.5 minutes.
Be anything.
It could be a year. Yeah. It could be a minute. I don't know. So turns out that Captain Maxwell, who's in charge of the Phoenix, has destroyed a science station, and then he's gone dark. So the Federation is not prepared for a new war. So Picard has to preserve the peace, sort of no matter what the cost. And these 3 Cardassians come aboard on this trip to get them, to get to Captain Maxwell. And I love this shot where the senior staff is not comfortable with the Cardassians coming aboard. This is very reminiscent of a famous book called Heart of Darkness, where former enemies must now be allies. And I think psychologically, it's very damaging. Like the mental pretzels you have to go through is exhausting. It's exhausting. And I actually really like that we get to see O'Brien having that reaction towards the Cardassians. Because our Cardassians beam aboard and O'Brien is not feeling too hot about them. Like he served with Captain Maxwell. We find out later that he was part of some skirmishes and battles in this war and had to like kill some Cardassians to like save Federation people. And it's just really difficult to watch. It really is. It really is. But yeah, that's a little bit, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but we find out though that Captain Maxwell's entire family was killed in a Cardassian sabotage.
Right. In a raid on like a bunch of civilians. Yeah. And what we find out later, and I think I'm skipping ahead a bit too, and I think that's okay. I think we could skip around on this one. Yeah. Because it's really like it's a complete story. This episode was really well done. It's one complete story.
Very well done.
And every scene you get a new page in the chapter, like of the story. So it's very well done. And we find out that the Cardassians had bad information. They were told this was some kind of military installation where they were developing some crazy high-tech weapons. So they were ordered to go in and destroy everybody, every single person they found, because they were in on it. When they got there, it happened to be just a bunch of like women and children, and all of the actual soldiers had gone somewhere else. They were in some other part of the battle, but they followed their orders and they just slaughtered all of these unarmed people. So during that skirmish, O'Brien was trying to protect a bunch of people that he was around, and somebody threw him a phaser and he turned and fired it. Didn't know it was set on like ultra super duper maximum, which we know that the phasers have. Yeah, the phasers have like a million settings. It was definitely set on kill, but it was set on like incinerate. And when he fired it, the person who he fired it at just kind of like burst into flames and just disintegrated. Kind of like Utah back in the whatever episode that was.
Yes.
Kind of like turned into like ash and disappeared.
Yeah.
And so, O'Brien said, it's not that I hate Cardassians. I hate what you turned me into, what you made me become. You turned me into a killer because I had to do that to save my life and the lives of other people. And I think you're absolutely right, Andrea. This whole episode is kind of about us versus them, about what does it look like in peacetime versus wartime. And actually, that's a conversation that Picard has with Galmaset, where Galmaset says, I'm a man of peace. Like, I don't want war anymore. And I can see you don't want war anymore. But there are some people who live for it. They don't know how to live any other way. And Picard's like, you're right. There are some people who cannot live without war. They don't know how to function in peacetime. And it actually reminds me of, what was the name of the episode with Roga Danar?
Oh,
the defector or the escapee?
Yes,
or
the defector. The defector, I think.
Yeah,
the defector was the Romulan episode, but it was the hunted.
The hunted. There we go. It was right after the defector or before something. But in that one, they were all super soldiers, kind of like Captain America style, and they had been physically, surgically altered, mentally altered to be super soldiers, and then the war was over. And then they were discarded into prisons because they could not be reintegrated without like tons of therapy, and like maybe some painful surgeries to like get them back to peacetime people. It just was not possible. And I feel like you don't need all of that surgery for that to happen, for you to be altered. I mean, if you are being told it's like kill or be killed, they're the enemy, they're animals, they're monsters, they eat babies and all this stuff. And then suddenly you're like, now we're friends. That's just, how is that going to really happen? There are some people who are not going to be able to make that transition because it's just too foreign, too hard.
It is. In preparation for this episode, I actually did a bunch of research about former enemies meeting in peacetime. And there were a couple that really stood out to me. And I think that, as I said, this episode is very much like allegorical for what's happened, to so many of our men and women who serve. And even so many people who never signed up to serve in the military, but have been like casualties of war psychologically, and then have to recover from it, which a lot of times can be like damn near impossible. A couple of stories that I came across. One was the Christmas truce of 1914 in World War I, on the Western Front, where there was a temporary ceasefire that had been called because it was Christmas time. And German forces came out of the trenches into no man's land, which was aptly called no man's land because nobody could survive out there. Like, you just get mowed down. And they came out unarmed, and the Allies thought it was a trap, but didn't fire. And they realized that they didn't realize this until they noticed that the men were unarmed. And they ended up coming out and like spending Christmas together, and even like striking up a friendly game of soccer and like sharing food, the little rations that they had. And also like picking up the bodies of their fallen comrades who had like fallen in the days before. It was just like gut wrenching to read about. And then the ceasefire ended a day later and they had to resume killing each other. And it was just fucking horrific. Like, and it was actually one of the last instances in our history where gallantry in battle was something that was observed. Like,
right.
It was very Klingon, where like you fight honorably, because now everybody fights like Romulans. It's all just sneak attacks and guerrilla warfare and blah, blah, blah. And then there was also one of my favorite books of all time is Band of Brothers. And there's a story that at the end of World War II, I believe it was a German soldier who had been separated from his company and had been walking through the like French countryside after like the war had been called over, and he was presumed dead or missing. So like his company had kind of moved on without him. So he was trying to make his way back home and ended up stumbling across like a French farmhouse. And there was a French farmer who had just gotten back from like killing Germans. And the toll of war had been so severe on them that they were, and this happens a lot, where like you serve in war and you have to kill. And when the war is over, you're like, I'll never kill anything ever again. Like, I want to live a life like dedicated to peace. And so the French farmer like invited him inside and gave him some eggs and like cooked him a meal. And they didn't really talk much because of the language barrier, but also like, I was just,
and they probably didn't even need to
like
talk
2 weeks ago. Yeah. And it was like that kind of thing. Like, I know several veterans of combat, and there are several who are very, very close to my heart. And like, this just really hit me hard, actually, like watching this, where it's like, oh my God, like the level of like psychological impact and damage that you have suffered, and then having to reintegrate back into peace is just awful. It's
and
inhumane.
For Maxwell, I felt like he should not be in charge of a ship. Like, he just shouldn't. He's not mentally and emotionally fit. He's had no counseling, clearly. And when O'Brien is asked his opinion on the captain, like, what's he like to Picard? So Picard can kind of feel him out because they're kind of on the trail at one point of the ship, and Picard wants to know how he can negotiate with them best. And Miles is just like, he's just a great man. He's a great guy. Like, there's nothing wrong with him. After all his family was killed, he took it pretty well. He kept joking and laughing and having a great time, never missed a minute of work. And I remembered the Lost episode, which was a couple weeks ago, where Deanna was talking to one of her patients and the same thing happened. Her husband had died, but she was in complete denial, and she was happy and laughing and having a great time and didn't miss a day of work and is learning a new language and playing with the babies in the nursery and all this stuff. And it's like, that stuff's all great. And you need to process what's going on inside, because it's just going to like fester and then bubble up and then ruin your life. And so I was just like, why is Maxwell even in charge of a ship with weapons at all? Why isn't he, in veteran services? Because he lost his family. That is a big deal.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's joking around and high-fiving people is a huge freaking red flag. That's not something to pat him on the back about. That's like, man, you should be sad. You should be sad.
Yes.
And it's okay if you're sad.
And I totally agree with you on that. And I think that there is in our culture and not just our culture in the United States, but kind of around the world and throughout history, like it's been human nature to eschew the negative emotions in favor of positive ones, or ones that look positive, even though they're not. So your whole family was massacred and you never missed a day of duty or an hour of duty. And like you volunteered to like, water the plants for everybody or whatever the fuck. It's like the auspices of appearing positive, like happy and jovial. And he says that Maxwell like always had a joke on his lips and a smile on his face and all this, like, this is a giant red flag. And I think it's so unfortunate that humans tend to see the smile on your lips and be like, you're good. But really that smile is a giant red alert. Mm-hmm. Like you're not processing the way that would be healthy, which is like, you should be crying and storming and breaking things and being angry and in denial and then sad and then accepting. Like you need to go through those stages, because when you don't, you end up becoming an emotional volcano that like, look at what happened with Maxwell. Like he's starting to hunt down Cardassians and blow up like innocent ships and like kill hundreds and hundreds of people because he just doesn't trust them. And it's like, maybe they're not trustworthy, but your trauma to Maxwell, it's like his trauma is not an excuse to behave like that. It's
right.
not.
Right. And there's like two things. One thing is I do think people grieve in a lot of different ways. I don't think there's any one way to do it. I don't think it doesn't have to be crying. It doesn't have to be breaking things. However, I don't think he grieved at all. There was no way he did it. He chose 0 ways, like no options at all, but festering and letting it explode. And then, the second thing is the way it exploded all over the Cardassians. He just has, he went on this crazy killing spree. And there's actually one scene. And like I said, we're just jumping around. So we'll eventually get to the end of the episode, but there's this one scene, which I think is fine for this one, where, they see him on the, I want to say radar. I don't know. They see him on screen, but they're not close enough to him. And they're kind of like warp 6, warp 7, warp 8. Hurry up, get there.
They're able to like track his progress, but they can't get there.
Yeah. They can see him and they can see that there's 2 Cardassian ships nearby. There's one that's just like a supply vessel. And then there's a nearby war vessel. And Galmasat is like, help us find your transponder codes. Like give us your transponder codes for the Phoenix so that our war vessel can get there and protect that little ship before they destroy it. And Picard's very hesitant because he doesn't want to give away their codes, because if war happens again, now you've got their code and who knows, they'd be defenseless. You can get inside their shields, whatever. But he sees that the captain is just going to just start opening fire on this supply vessel, this random supply vessel. So he gives the transponder codes and the warship arrives and the Phoenix just blows it out of the sky.
Completely.
And everyone's like, oh, and then they're like, well, maybe he won't. Maybe can we get there fast enough? And before they even finish the sentence, the ship blows the supply ship from the sky. And you're just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And then Galmasat's like, there were 600 people on the warship and there were 50 people on that supply vessel. And I'm like, he just murdered 650 people in like a breath, and then has the nerve to just keep on going. He himself is just cleaning up Cardassian space by destroying every ship he finds. And I was horrified, and and everybody was shocked. But I wanted a little more horror. I wanted a little more like, this is unacceptable. We're going to blow down that ship ourselves if we have to. Like, I didn't want it to be like, let's just have a chit chat. So fast forwarding a little bit, they do end up catching up with the Phoenix. Okay. Picard does have a sit down with Maxwell, and he is super chipper. He's high-fiving people getting off the turbo lift.
He really is.
Giving out snacks and handshakes and cigars. And I'm just like, you just murdered 600, not to mention the people at the science station and whoever else he's killed while they've been talking and looking for him that they didn't even know he killed. We don't even know those people, but for sure, like 20 minutes ago, he just killed 650 people, and he's high-fiving and handshaking. And when he talks to the captain, he seems like the picture of mental health and soundness. That really worried me.
Yes, that is very concerning. It's super concerning. I think that there's a level of distance as well, like with that kind of fighting. Like, when I reference like the World War I, World War II stuff, that was World War II wasn't really as much hand-to-hand combat if any at all, but it was really like shooting from a distance, and nowadays, you can, practically from your fucking cell phone, like send off a missile that's going to travel 600 miles and like destroy a village. And it's like, okay, like you never have to see the faces of your enemies.
Yeah.
So that distance creates an emotional barrier for Maxwell. He's like, taking care of business. Yeah, he's just cleaning up Cardassian space, but it's like those were people with families and like all kinds of shit. Like, yes, and he is the picture of like happy-go-lucky, like me on a Sunday afternoon going for like a burrito at the beach or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like do. It's like, oh, you just killed more than
so many people,
like almost 1,000 people. Like, okay, yeah. There's
seemingly on a whim.
It seemingly on a whim,
totally on a
whim. Yeah. And like very completely unprovoked. Now, there are a couple of things that we jumped over that I want to talk about. When they bring O'Brien in to the senior meeting with the Cardassians to give them some information about Maxwell, Chief O'Brien ends up leaving and getting into the turbo lift with a few Cardassians. And one of them says, hey, we're going to 10 Forward. Would you like to join us for a drink? And he is extremely rude to that Cardassian. And then later ends up telling Keiko, as they're talking over dinner, he recounts that like
some other people were uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly.
Inside of that briefing. Not him, though. Yes. He's fine. But other people were very uncomfortable. Why weren't they so uncomfortable? Why weren't they just cool like him?
Exactly. That's the thing where Keiko was like, are you okay with the Cardassians? I know you fought against them. He's like, I'm fine. Like, I like them. And I love that Keiko is like, okay. Like the self-awareness is really not there. And yes, when O'Brien does talk to that Cardassian in 10 Forward, he really does say like, he recounts the story of how he had to kill those Cardassians to protect those Federation civilians. He says, I don't hate you, Cardassian. I hate what you turned me into. And I think that that's a really prevalent mindset among veterans of any kind of skirmishes where it's like the damage that you now take, that you now are a killer, you've had to kill to protect. And it's like, you've never wanted to be that. Like very few people ever are like, I want to be a killer unless there's something like completely fucking wrong with you. Right. So it's really sad. And when
he does apologize though, and I have to give him props for that.
He does. Like, he does.
He sits down with them and he goes, you know what? I have to apologize for how I treated you. So he wasn't totally completely unaware of his behavior, which I thought he was after his conversation with Keiko, where he was saying other people felt uncomfortable. I was like,
between Keiko and the 10 Forward scene, Picard finds O'Brien and asks him about Captain Maxwell in the transporter room. And O'Brien was like, I like them fine, but I do know them. Like, I do know you have to watch your back around them. And Picard says something that I really love. And he says, anger, I'm paraphrasing, but anger becomes so familiar that one becomes comfortable in it. And after a while, you can't remember feeling any other way. And I was like, like I was watching that and just totally getting chills because it's so true, where he just becomes comfortable with that like distrust and that anger, where he's like, I don't have anything wrong. There's nothing wrong with you personally. I just don't trust your people. It's like, seems like you do have something against.
Right. Yeah.
Seems but like maybe you do.
And then that other thing about what you just said, where he said, you turned me into this. It's like, O'Brien, you picked up the phaser and you fired to save your own life and to save the lives of others.
Yeah.
But you did that. I'm not saying you did the wrong thing. It was either do that or die. You did the right thing. You saved yourself. However, you did that. And it's not fair to say the Cardassians made you that, because you did do that. But you know what? That's very natural. I think if I was ever in the military, which I've never was, but everyone in my family has been in the military. My parents met in the military. I know people like veterans sometimes feel that way about the government that sent them, right? You turned me into this. You literally brainwashed me and trained me to turn me into a monster, is what they might be thinking, because these are things you would never do in your daily life. You wouldn't just like, burn villages down or shoot people or all these crazy things that you have to do in war. You wouldn't do that walking down the street getting groceries. Like that's not how you were raised to be. So I kind of feel like it's not totally untrue, like they did.
I agree.
That. You also volunteered for this because you wanted to save your people. You wanted to protect your people. You wanted to fight and keep people safe. But in order to do that, you kind of had to give away your soul, right? You had to lose who you were as a person, which is so heartbreaking. And I understand you wanting to blame anybody else because this isn't the person you want it to become.
Yeah.
It's really
No,
sad.
absolutely. And I think that you have to find something or somebody to blame, because otherwise your anger goes nowhere, and it's very, very true. I think you're absolutely right. I've seen a lot of cases, of those who are very close with me who like do blame the government for like turning me into this like person who's like had to do these things. Like there is a lot of like pain and a lot of hurt there. Now Maxwell chats with Picard, and Picard is like, look, we can't just let you go wandering off into Cardassian space, fucking firing on everybody and killing all these Cardassians. And Maxwell is like, you cannot believe a word these Cardassians say. A science station within arm's reach of 3 sectors of Federation space. All these like supply ships going back and forth everywhere. Like nobody needs that many Diet Cokes. Okay. Like there's more to this supply run than like meets the eye. And Picard, I wish Picard gave him a little bit more room to be like, you know what, you might be right, but we still are here to protect the peace. So we can't act on it. But he really just tells Maxwell, like, you have to come back with me to Starbase 211.
He did give him some opportunities to like validate his claims. He said, okay, who's your source? And he's like, I can't tell you that. He's like, where's your documentation? Do you have any, satellite photos? Do you have anything at all to substantiate what you're saying? And he had nothing. The more that Picard kept pressing him to give him some kind of proof of any kind whatsoever, the more that he responded with just, I know them. I know these people. I have a feeling in my gut. And it was like, now it sounds like a personal vendetta. Right now, it sounds like you totally made this up and it's just a vendetta because you have no proof and you're just going off of like your gut or what you think they're probably doing. But you just murdered 650 people based off what you think they're probably doing. And we can't allow that to continue.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And that's a lot of times what happens when you deal with people who are running on guts, when you're like, can you give me an example or some specifics? And they're like, I don't have to do that right now. You're like, except that you do, because you just killed a fuck ton of people. Like, this is like really bad. And they, Maxwell does say, okay, fine, I'll come back with you to Starbase 211. Picard does allow him to retain his dignity, and command the Phoenix like on the way back. And Picard does say, if you do not comply, I'm going to have to throw you in the brig, and then we're going to have to tow your fucking ship in disgrace, like to Starbase 211. And you've had this long and illustrious career, and let's not have to do that. And Maxwell's like, fine. So he gets back to the Phoenix and then immediately takes off and starts going after Cardassians again. And Picard is like, God damn it. We just had this discussion. Oh my God.
I thought that was such a mistake of Picard's.
Yeah, that was you know what, Picard, this is on you. The man is clearly not fit for duty.
He's clearly not fit. And then you're like,
ship back.
You're like, give me your pinky promise that you're going to quietly follow us out of Cardassian space.
What? After you just murdered more than 650 people.
And like, again, has no remorse whatsoever. At no point was he like, oh yeah, it was pretty sad that I had to do that, but I had to do what I had to do. No, like it wasn't like these soldiers that you talked about with that Christmas thing where like they probably did not feel great about having to shoot each other, but they were just following orders, right? This guy is not following orders. He is not following orders.
Do bang bang, like he's just shooting.
Don't let that man get back in charge of his ship.
No, and let's also remember that the thing that kicked off this episode was Maxwell had totally incinerated a science station with everybody on board too. So like you're starting to tally up near 1,000 fucking people. You do not get behind the wheel of that car, buddy. So he takes off. And he's in pursuit of a supply ship that is like minimally armed. So the Enterprise is like, God damn it. All right, warp 7, let's go. And Maxwell tells Picard to board the supply ship. Now, he doesn't actually arm his weapons. He's like, I've just caught up with the supply ship. Now you are going to board this or I am going to destroy the ship. And Picard's like, you cannot imagine that I'm going to let you do that. And they have this standoff. And O'Brien does say, like, let me beam over. And here I thought of you, Shereese, because Riker's like, he's got his shields up. He's never going to allow you to beam over. And I love that the explanation of the transporters comes from the transporter chief, who says there's a transport window between cycles every 5.5 minutes. That's 1/50th of a second. Trust me, I can get in there. And I was like, 1/50th of a second, you're really gambling with your life here.
But he's a really good transporter chief. Yes. So I will say
really good.
I totally noticed that as well. And I was like, finally, we get some kind of explanation about why we can sometimes transport through shields. And I can now die a happy woman. That's all I wanted to know.
Yes, you're right. Like the person who's going to perfectly explain this is going to be the transporter chief. So I was like, Shereese got some answers. Woohoo! Like, I was pretty psyched about that.
I was so excited. Now I will never complain about that again because I'm just going to assume everybody who's ever been in a starship knows that little trick.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Okay, so O'Brien does make it over. And Maxwell is like, he's got to do this. He's got to beam over. And O'Brien is like, trust me, he won't. He will blow you out of the sky before he like breaks his peace treaty. This is the kind of person that Picard is.
Picard had said that thing to Galmaset when they found his aide. His aide was looking up something on the computer and Worf found him and was like, he's trying to get into our super secret files. And he's like, sir, I wasn't. I just want to see how their whatever, how their relay system worked because I think we could like improve our own. And he's just like, why were you in their files at all? What were you even thinking? And I honestly thought he was going to shoot him right there on the spot. He looked like really like pissed. But then he didn't. And I was like, phew. And then Picard was just like, you know what? I consider it closed. You handle it the way you need to handle it. And he was just like, I don't know if I'd be so passive if our roles were reversed and I found a Federation person sticking around on my computers. And he was just like, look, this piece is too important to let one man destroy it. And Picard stands by that. So if that one man is Maxwell, Maxwell's got to go. And that one man is not going to be Picard either. And that's why Picard refused to beam over, even though he had his suspicions. You could see how he was kind of like doing side eye. He was still like, I'm not going to do that because one man is not going to break this peace that there's been so much bloodshed over.
It can cost the lives of millions. Yeah. And Maxwell says, what the hell happened to this war? And that broke my heart into a million pieces for Maxwell because it's over.
Yeah.
The war is over.
Yeah.
And in a lot of veterans' minds, the war is never over. And this reminded me of like the last bit of research that I did on this. There's an incredible book called All Quiet on the Western Front. Is written from the perspective of a German soldier in World War I who has suffered so much during this like war that like all of his friends have been killed. He's gone through these like horrific experiences, like absolutely horrific, that he actually laments the end of the war is coming because he has been ruined for peacetime. Like all he knows is war. Mm-hmm. And I would say this might be polarizing, but I would say mercifully, he's actually killed just before like the end of the war, like in the last like just handful of days. And it's noted that like his face when they find his body is like very peaceful and like looks relieved to be that the end has like come at last. And he doesn't have to go through this like horror of living the rest of his life in peace when he's been like completely ruined for peace. Like,
which basically means he wouldn't live at peace. He would still be in his own personal war all the time. Like he was never going to escape. Because his mind was trapped.
Yeah, his mind was trapped. Exactly. We're like, the war would never be over for him, which is really sad. And O'Brien had started humming a song in front of Keiko called The Minstrel Boy that he and Maxwell and several others used to sing on the Rutledge together. And it seems like it was like the Irish contingent. I'm pretty sure that's where all the Irish people went that were like aboard the Enterprise earlier. But it was so they end up singing this song together. Which was originally written in memory of those who had died during the 1798 rebellion of United Irishmen. So it was a real song. And it was actually a high point for some of the writers of the show who had wanted that like very nostalgic, like tug at your heartstrings moment. And I thought that it was, honestly, I thought it was delivered beautifully. And
it was really beautiful. And it was kind of sad. I mean, it definitely felt like a sea shanty kind of a song, but it felt like this, as they were singing, I just felt camaraderie, fellowship, friendship, and also kind of like loss, nostalgia, grief, past, like all of that felt, I guess it's because they were just kind of sitting down on a table, staring out of the window, singing a sad song. It just kind of like, it felt very, very sweet and very beautiful and very sad.
It was very sad. It was. And it opened the opportunity for O'Brien to say, it's over, sir. Like it's over. And Maxwell,
thank God for O'Brien. Otherwise, Picard would have had to fire on him. And that's what he said too. He was like, I'm about to fire on another starship. And I don't want to do that. He doesn't want to fire on any ship, but certainly not his own ship. But he will do it if he has to.
Yeah. And like Maxwell is not the only person aboard the Phoenix. Like, it seems like he's alone. We never see anybody
but he's got
else,
a whole
but
crew.
like, it's a whole crew. Yeah. So Maxwell finally gives up his command and turns himself
Picard wouldn't
in.
destroy them. He would just like disable them.
And then tow them back.
But still, to fire on your own people,
like
in a war zone is like all of it is just, it's nothing he wants on his conscience. It's nothing he wants to do, but he will absolutely do it if that's what he has to do. And that's why he's like, you better, if you think you can talk him down, do it now.
Yeah.
And he did. Absolutely. And you're like, phew, thank God.
Thank God for O'Brien on this one. Now, as they head back to Federation space, Picard does speak to Galmaset in private. And he says, in war, Maxwell twice earned the Federation's highest honor for courage and valor. And if he could not find a role for himself in peace, we can pity him, but we shall not dismiss him. This whole episode really gave me chills. And I was glad because I had not remembered it at all. And I was like, wow, this is a very well done episode. And it just speaks to like so many different issues that so many people have had to live through. Now, as Galmaset turns to leave, Picard does do a mic drop on him. He's like, one more thing. Maxwell was right. A scientific station with an arm's reach of 3 Federation sectors, cargo ships running round the clock, carrying high energy fields to jam sensors, like, this is all a lie. Like, you guys totally are rearming. And I wish that Picard had gone to go visit Maxwell in his quarters and said, I couldn't allow you to continue killing people, but also like, but I do know you're right. Yeah. And Picard knew like he couldn't do anything about it because he'd been sent there to keep the peace, and boarding the ship would have started a war. But he did say, the Federation, like, we will be watching. And I fucking love the Shereese. At the end of that line, he turns his back on Galmaset. And this dislike is clear on his face. And I was like, Picard is not immune to the human condition, which is so freaking refreshing.
Nor was he fooled or tricked by anything. And I think the fact that, like, even though we don't see him go talk to Maxwell and say, hey, man, like, I know you're right. Even though we don't see that, I 100% know that he communicates that because of that sentence he just said, where he said, the Federation will be watching. Tell your leaders the Federation will be watching, which means as soon as they get back to the starbase, Maxwell is going to have to face justice, but Picard is going to be there to say, hey, by the way, everything he said was correct. They are doing this. They are rearming, and we need to keep an eye on the neutral zone. So like, that is going to come out. It's not going to be the way Maxwell thought, where he's like, Picard, you're going to be a fool. They're going to attack us. It wasn't all that.
Yeah.
But
he wasn't. Yeah. Maxwell was looking to like kind of go out in a blaze of glory. And it's like, it's not going to happen the way that you pictured it, Maxwell.
Right. But he will be vindicated.
Aware now.
Yeah. He will be vindicated. I mean, he's still going to have to face a ton of charges because he killed so many people.
Yeah.
And almost broke the peace. And then Picard was like, and he actually thought he was saving the peace. He's like, no, because I'm going to keep them from attacking. And Picard's like, no, you're starting a whole nother war. Like, you're not saving peace. You're ruining peace. So he, at least his fears, paranoias will be validated, but he still has to face the music for his actions. And I actually wanted a little more like outrage from Galmaset, because even if we were rearming, like you said, he just killed like almost 1,000 people.
Yeah.
What exactly are you going to do to this person? You're going to put him in the brig for killing 1,000. So if I kill 1,000 of your people, you're just going to put me in the brig and give me a slap on the wrist. Like, what exactly? This can't be okay either. So anyways, it's just a really sticky situation. But it really is. It's I do love the end. There's no winning. There's no winning in the situation. I do love that end as well. If the scene would have cut before Picard did the mic drop, I would have been like, yeah, that sucks. It's a testament to like veterans, psychological damage and like what they have to overcome to find a life for themselves in peace. But I love that Picard's like, one more thing. Yeah. You're a lying son of a bitch. Yep. Okay. We're on to you. And I was like, yes, and we got our eyes on you, pal. So good. Yes. Yeah. And the whole episode, Andrea, I was like, is he right or is he not? I wasn't sure. Is Maxwell making this up, or what if it's actually true? Because Maxwell did seem very sane. He also seemed like he wasn't allowing himself to grieve, but he also seemed sane and also on the borderline of insane at times when he was like, I just have to kill everybody. Yeah. And you're how's like, your day? And you're like, everything is fine. You're like, exactly. Okay, so I really didn't know until that last scene. And I was like, oh man, he was right the whole time. But I was on the edge of my seat. I didn't know. And that's really hard to do in like a weekly show like this,
Yeah.
like Trek, where you don't know the ending before it even. Do you remember that stupid
Yes.
episode Up the Long Ladder where we were like, okay, well, we know the solution to this in about 10 seconds.
Yes, that was the Irish episode. That was
Yeah.
it. Yeah, where it's
This-
like, okay, yeah,
You guys are going to do over for that. That was like so insulting to
with
anyone
Irish
who's ever,
overtones.
yeah, who's ever said the
Fantastic.
word Irish. Like it was just like horrible to everyone. And this one is just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, and it feels like it's paying homage to Irish people in a way that's very subtle and not like super racist. So
yeah, and not super racist and like cartoonish, which 100% agree. This is a do-over for Up the Long Ladder. Now, final thought here. I pulled up a tiny bit more trivia. Director Chip Chalmers observed, quote, "This episode aired during the Gulf War and was about Picard doing everything he could to prevent a war happening during a time when the United States of America was doing everything it could to start a war." I thought it was a real interesting dichotomy of ideas. And I got that from Captain's Logs, The Unauthorized Complete Trek Voyages, this fantastic book that I have. This episode spoke volumes to me. I mean, you take away aliens and you just put in like a different, ethnic group, and it's the exact same story. And it's fucking heart-wrenching for me. Like, I don't know if I can watch this episode again, but oh my God, it was so beautifully done. It was just a really beautiful episode. I give this like a solid A. It was so good. Like, there wasn't a fun aspect to it. Like next week's episode is just really fun and light. But this one was like deep and really like somber. I loved it. I really loved this episode. What are your final thoughts?
So my final thoughts was that this episode was pretty interesting because it had a lot of different moving parts. It was an O'Brien episode. It was like a Spy Games episode. It was an episode about loss and grief. It was an episode about war and peace. It had a lot of things going on, but they all blended together. So I thought that's what made it pretty interesting and a very standout episode in that sense. That it's like, it's got all these different themes, but they all blend together nicely. They're not like an A plot and a B plot that have nothing to do with each other.
Yes. Yes, it really is the story of like, O'Brien going about his day, having to deal with these Cardassians he's been at battle with, and then coming home and talking about it with his wife, where it's like seamless. It was seamless. It was really great. Well, I'm going to go cry my eyes out for about a half hour. But Shereese, I really loved talking about this episode with you. I love that we get to just be like Trek nerds. It's so much fun.
So great.
Guys, thank you so much for listening. Next week, we are talking season 4, episode 13, Devil's Due. We will see you all next week.
Bye. Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.